and Pops talking about Black Mirror season 6. I know I'm late to the game. I'm going to go back and do some early episodes. So people have been asking for a couple, so I'm going to do those first. But let's get to the final episode. It's called Demon 79. Give you my thoughts, break down a few elements, and kind of go from there. I'd love to hear from you guys how you feel about this episode and feedbacks from you. Demon 79 is kind of the first one that I can tell that at least it was told that has like what's called a red mirror, which is more about like supernatural elements instead of like the technological stuff. And you can tell it has a completely different feel. And I will say, I'm a sucker for stylish because it's set in 1979. It feels very immersive of 1979. So many things really do work in that scale as far as being historically accurate or at least nostalgia enough to feel like you're there. I'm not going to pretend that I know the inner workings of a shoe store, in 1979 England, but it's close enough for me. And it centers around Nida. She is this assistant in this department store. She works in shoes. She's a horrible coworker who makes all sorts of crazy racist and xenophobic remarks. There's this conservative politician, Michael Smart. He's making his political speeches, very anti-immigrant. And then you have this sort of just this animosity that she's feeling and just building up and building up, and it comes to a head because her food smells so bad or whatever. The coworker turns her into the boss. He's basically like, "You need to go down to the basement and eat," basically. And I will say, everything to this point, I thought to myself, what is going on? And I actually paused and had to look it up because surely there's more to the story, and there is. Charlie Brooker is not the only one who wrote this. There's a writing credit to Basha K. Ali. Now, maybe you don't know much about Basha K. Ali. Basha K. Ali broke in with a horribly generic, pointless episode of Loki in which they're on the purple planet and there's a train or whatever, and they're still stuck on the purple planet. That episode that she did because she wanted to somehow include the fact that he is bisexual, that she's talked about, that was her motivation in writing that story, in a completely pointless thing. And because of some of this and her fake humor resume, being a comedian, she got the gig over on to do Ms. Marvel, which I will admit at least brought sentiment and elements of their culture in a very authentic way. The family parts and all of that. It definitely is one of the better Marvel Disney Plus shows, even though it doesn't feel like a superhero show much at all. I'm not convinced that she has read the comic books or is a fan of them or really even cares about any of the super hero elements of the character. And now here she does. She lands this gig writing a Black Mirror, or at least co-writing a Black Mirror. And you can tell that she definitely has sort of some anti-white sentiment that she's trying to discuss and work through, some prejudices and biases. I don't think she's really old enough to reflect. Yeah, she wasn't even born until 1989. And Charlie Brooker isn't born until 71. So he's my age. So he would have a little bit of reference, but this is all more like the perception of the prejudices and biases rather than personal experiences, because I don't know that I would buy some of the elements and how it's presented to this point in the show. So anyway, once you're down in the basement, this is where the show goes in completely different directions. So if you don't want spoilers, this would be your chance. I can just tell you that it is my least favorite Black Mirror episode to date. It's not one I can recommend, and I have no desire to watch it again. And if you want to stick around and watch me try to mull through the moral conundrums and the lack of logic that's associated with this episode, feel free to stick with me because that's what's going to happen next. It is, oh boy. All right, so you've been warned. Let's dive into it. So all this is actually done very well because there's only like 3 sets. There's the shoe store, the basement, and her apartment, and they kind of travel around to other apartments and scenes and things like that. But it's very, very, very small scale, and you have appearances by other characters. Well, what happens in the basement is she injures herself. She pricks her finger, and when she's searching around in this drawer, and she finds this wooden talisman, and the blood makes this talisman come alive. It opens a demon in training. His name is Gaap, or Gaap, Gaap. right? And he takes the form of this black musician dude that she likes, right? So I think his name he goes by Boney M, right? So he's like the hot black musician guy with the afro and the whole things and an overzealous costuming that feels very 1970s. And there's all this wasted screen time. It basically says she has 3 days to kill 3 humans, but because she is an innocent soul, but who is vulnerable to this type of coercion. And this will bring about stopping the apocalypse. So if she doesn't do that, the apocalypse is going to happen. That's right. The world's going to end. Fire's going to, everywhere, right? Fire and brimstone, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. So then you basically have a police investigation that starts happening because she's convinced to do this. So you have one murder, then another murder, then another murder. Now, one of them turns out to be a dude she sees at the shoe store, she sees at a pub. Turns out he's like a pedo. And when she attacks him, the roommate, or I guess a flatmate, sees this and she ends up killing him too. Now, then we're told that the pedo doesn't count because he's already a murderer or whatever he is. And he's just a sleazy dude. He doesn't count because he was already headed to hell already. So everything is about a metaphor of unspoken things about heaven versus hell, good versus evil, stopping the apocalypse. We never get into specifics about spirituality or morality or anything like that. It's this grayness of her temptation and how vile she'll go, how corruptible she really, really is. And it's about trying to moving. And she gets the idea that she ends up with like blinders on towards this politician, that she has to take him out because she can ask Gaap to show her things. So she can see the future, she can see different things, and she sees he's going to be this horrible politician. I mean, there's literally like on the nose, alt-right, I don't want to say Trumpian, but there's like that sort of alt-right stereotype, totalitarian type stuff, anti-immigration, xenophobia, all that kind of stuff you can think about. All this stuff just is very heavy-handed and completely not interesting at all. And is really one of the worst thought out components of why is it murdering people would stop something bad happening. It's never really kind of explained, like wouldn't doing good things stop something bad, but it's almost like we have to murder 3 people, we have to make human sacrifices to satiate the demons would have power, and by not having that taken care of, then they just rise up and we have apocalypse. It just doesn't make any lick of sense, none whatsoever. It also makes no lick of sense how vulnerable she is to physically just keep murdering people. She buys all this. She gets it. It feels very real to her. And at the end, when you have this investigation that starts to kind of piece things together, they're following her track. She's obviously a novice. She has no idea what she's doing. And she's explaining how all this, the demon explains everything. This is what happens. And then she gets stopped. So she doesn't end up murdering the last guy. And they're talking to her about it, and she truly believes all this. They think she's completely nuts. And of course, spoiler alert, yes, it actually happens. Nuclear missiles start raining down, destroy the world. She has to go off with Gaap, or he says something about going off with he's like takes him, because if he doesn't get her to do it, he's stuck in his own version of hell, which is basically like a void. And somehow he's allowed to take someone into his void, which would now nullify the void because he'd have someone with him. Okay. I don't understand that what Demon 79 is supposed to make us start talking about or thinking about, because it feels like an interesting low budget 1970s horror movie. And I love elements of like Gaap, for instance, like he's super interesting with having like this sort of like 70s punk persona in some ways. They feel like there's almost like romantic chemistry between them in some ways. But it's just like this very strange, interesting thing that Basha K. Ali had, and somehow they connected paths to make this happen, and this is what we're stuck with. It does not feel like Black Mirror of anything else. It's not even like it's giving you the moral binaries that to me I see Black Mirror. That's kind of like the theme of Black Mirror so far is he tries to push you into a place where you have sort of like it's playing that worst case scenario game. What would you rather do? Which bad thing would you rather do? Or would you compromise yourself? Would you compromise your principles? Or would you let someone die? And these are the kinds of things. This one is like it's trying to get you there, but it ignores any other rational thought, any other proclivity to the fact that she never seeks out like religious counsel. She never talks to anyone prior to like the next murder in between days or anything like that. I just felt like everything about this was just so forced and heavy handed. I just didn't enjoy it. Let's just quickly run through a few shots and scenes. I definitely want to just give you some of the visuals if we can. I mean, you can see, like, look at the scenery and the location. It's really, really, I like this a lot. This is really nice. Shoe store, awful coworker. This is this. There's the boss telling her she has to go to the basement. There's the coworker. Stop immigration, protect British culture. Very xenophobic nonsense. Down in the basement, she finds a talisman, so you can see the blood on her finger that creates this talisman. The Gaap comes alive, and this is kind of how he looks. Let's see, it's just very over the top, and he gives her these visions of what can happen, and then they got to go on a murder. Right? He's got these ridiculously long nails and stuff. It's very, very strange. Very, very strange. This is the police investigation starts unpacking. He stays in this ridiculous getup the whole time. And then this is what you'll see in the poster too. The thing with the hammer, instead of giving her like a gum, or I think he says something like "You're not a stabby kind of person" or whatever. And then you end up with this is the weird, creepy guy, and she leads him along like he's going to sleep with him, just so she can bludgeon him. But then the neighbor sees it, so she has to kill the neighbor. And it's lucky that she did because it met the deadline. And here's that politician I was telling you about who plays like it's so much screen time is wasted with this sort of like obsession with this xenophobic alternate reality that would have happened in 1979 or something. And then you have this sort of like showcase of the cat and mouse chase scene to kill this politician before it's finally stopped at the last second. And they have this investigation. And of course, then you have this reality with the bombs falling. Which the irony is that this part at the end actually was pretty interesting, that the fact that it was real and that actually happened. But the journey and stuff like that, the thought processes, the what they're trying to provoke in us, I don't think works at all. I think it's crap. And I'm sick of all these like racist trope things just thrown around so loosely and not really giving it a whole lot of thought. It's like it's never flushed out. It's just like, okay. I mean, you chose not to kill the coworker, and she's equal. She was way more offensive than the politician was. Way more offensive than like the one stranger was. I don't know. It's all very, very strange. And it wasn't. It's definitely my least favorite to date by a long shot. That's my take on it. Anyway, hope you're enjoying this. If you have other Black Mirrors you'd like me to watch, I'm going to circle around now to go back to the beginning, episode 1 and 2 of season 1. I'll get to those relatively soon here. Get those up on the channel for you. You guys can beat me up over being so late to the game on those. But I appreciate hanging out with me. Thank you so much. I am Pops.